Hi. Have you ever built a feature that works fine on development, but as soon as as a user starts, for example, uploading a huge file, the UI becomes laggy, and you think there might be something wrong with, for example, React or JavaScript, but the browser is doing whatever you have told it to do. The problem is that everything is working on the main thread, and sometimes async await also doesn't help with it. Today we will look at how web workers help you with that. Let's move to the next example. So here you can see that I have a React app which has a counter and has a button run heavy task and an increment button. And when you click on an increment button, it works as expected. The counter gets incremented and everything is fine. But whenever I click on a heavy task, click on run heavy task, it says it starts heavy task, and after a couple of seconds it says that it's finished, which, for example, consider it as for example, you are processing a large CSV file or a JSON file which user uploaded. So if I run the heavy task, you see my cursor or the point cursor is in the pointer state, and if I click on increment button, it does nothing. So after it is finished, you see that the counter is just directly updates it to, for example, 20 or 19, however times I have clicked it. And now let's look at the code what's going on. So here you can see that the app.jsx, in the app.jsx file I have a counter. I have a function which replicates a huge, for example, block event, or where, for example, user has uploaded a file which is meant to be processed, and there is a handle click button which has a console log start heavy task, and which calls the main main thread function and console log. So here is a basic app.jsx file that is running a heavy task and an increment button. So what's happening here? When you click on this button, run heavy task, JavaScript enters into a loop where it blocks the main thread. React cannot and React cannot re-render. Uh, Events cannot fire, and even the counter is frozen. At this point, most of us developers think that okay, we can use, for example, async, or put the block main thread into the set timeout function. But it doesn't solve the problem because both of them works on the main thread. So what we can actually do to fix this issue? We can use something called web workers, which is a separate thread to the main thread, which is used for heavy task manipulation or data manipulation, or and it doesn't have DOM access. It just for the sake of doing computation. Now let's see how we can create workers and fix the issue. So first of all, in my files, I have helpers folder, and I can create a new file called, for example, worker.jsl. And in this worker, I can put this function, cut this function from app.js and put it here, first of all. And then worker have an on message function which takes an event. I can, for example, console.log here first that okay, worker starting. And what we can do is we can get the seconds from, for example, event.data, and we can do is call this block main thread with this milliseconds. Previously, we were directly passing 3000, but in this case, we will pass the 3000 to the worker. That okay, block this main thread for 3. 3000 milliseconds. And then in the end, I will self.post message that okay, this is done. And I will also, for example, put in another console log here that worker is finished. Perfect. And then what I can do is I can go to my app.jsx file, and here I can import the worker, which can be created using a new worker object. And in this, I will pass the URL to the worker. Since I'm using Vite, I have to follow this specific protocol, but you can directly import it from, for example, giving it a path that okay, we have worker in helpers dot worker dot js, and the next parameter would be, sorry, it would be inside import, sorry, import dot meta dot url, and the second parameter would be that it would be a type of a module. So we have created a new worker and give it a path worker.js. And in my handling function, what I can do instead of directly calling block main thread, I can do worker.post message and give it the parameter 3000 millisecond. And we can wait for the worker message that when it's done, sorry, on message, we can add a function to it that it will console.log finished, and I can remove this console log from here. What we did, we sent all of the high processing to the worker thread, and our main thread is now completely free. So if I, for example, refresh the page, we can start with counter 0. And if I increment it, everything works as expected. If I run the heavy task, it says that first the heavy task is started, which is this, and then it sends it to worker, which then finishes, and then we get this, okay, the handle click function is finished. So now if I run the heavy task, I can now, even if the task is running, you can see the UI is non-blocked, and I can increment it. That is not a problem now. So if your UI freezes again, don't refactor the functions, try to use workers if it's possible in your scenario or your use case. And if you like the video, like, share, and subscribe. And until then, see you in the next one. Thank you.